So why is it that the greatest asset that we have, our employees, our workforce, if they're not healthy and well, what do you think that does to patient care? What do you think that does to the likelihood that they're going to stay working for us?
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today, I sat down and had a conversation with Dr. Richard Safir. He's a highly respected leader in the employee health and well-being field. His work is featured by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and he's been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Fortune magazine. Dr. Safir currently serves as the Chief Medical Director of Employee Health and Well-being for Johns Hopkins Medicine, where he leads the Healthy at Hopkins Employee Health and Well-being Strategy. He's also the author of A Cure for the Common Company, a well-being prescription for a happier, healthier, and more resilient workforce. He's also the scientific contributor to A Cure for the Common Workday, journaling towards a happier and healthier workday. His career journey and simple tactics for improving the vibes in a workplace are something to pay attention to. All right, Rich. Well, it's so great to have you. I'm really excited for our conversation today. And as I do with most guests, I like to start out kind of grounding the conversation in the guest definition of a vibe. Like, what is it to you? What does it mean to you? How do you define it? And maybe more specifically in the workplace, but it doesn't have to just be that.
Yeah, thanks, Kristi. I was prepared for this because I've been listening to your podcast, which is great, by the way. And thank you for having me on because, wow, now I'm part of this because I was listening to a podcast with Scott Shute that you had earlier. So anyway, I'm here. This is great. So, it's interesting. I've never been asked to define vibe. And I think when it would come up for a good chunk of my life, I just thought it was kind of like the buzz. But I got a little bit more sophisticated with vibe several years ago because of two different things that were happening in my professional career simultaneously. One of those items was my exposure and introduction to something called heart math. At its core, it's where heart focused breathing meets positive psychology. And the second thing that's happened over the last 5, 10 years, probably 10 years, is my adoption of a well-being culture model. And one of those building blocks is called social climate. And collectively, those two pieces of my professional and personal life has led me to believe that for me, vibe means the collective emotional energy. So the emotional energy of the group of people that I'm with.
Yeah. And that could be different depending on who you're with, what environment you're in, what the collective goal is within, with that group of people, what you're up to.
Yeah. And it can vary within an organization. Like one team might have a very good social climate or vibe, and another team may not have a very good social climate or vibe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So this question came up for me the other day when I was talking to somebody. Do you think that the vibe is static and hard to change, or does it change frequently within an organization?
So I would say that it doesn't change frequently in an organization. I would say, well, let's just look at the weather. Okay. So you're in San Diego, right?
I'm near San Diego, yes.
You're near enough. You're closer than me. You're on the West Coast. I'm on the East Coast. So I definitely would say you're the West Coast weather.
Definitely warmer here right now than it is on the East Coast.
Right. So there you go. So your social climate is along the lines of sunny and warm. Now, you may have a day where it rains, but that's just the weather for the day. The climate is sunny and warm. And an organization and a team usually has a certain vibe. And while it can change, overall, it doesn't change very quickly. There might be an off day, but more or less, it takes quite a bit of, there needs to be several influences to change it drastically over time.
Yeah. That's a really, really good point because I think in today's world, we're so used to the quickness of information and reality. And so often, if there's a bad day, we think like that's just the way it is now versus like this is a blip in the overall, vibe of an organization. So, the great point that I think realistically we need to expect that not every day is sunshine and rainbows, right? That there might be a rainy day.
Thanks to social media, we're now in the element of instant gratification, so that if the vibe is not awesome one day, it's like, oh my God, things are terrible around here. And interestingly enough, so one of the chapters in my book on social climate, how can we break that down so leaders can improve the social climate or vibe? And one of the key elements is having a positive outlook. Now, everybody has a bad day, but if most of the days are people coming and contributing with a positive attitude or a positive outlook, I would say it's going to be pretty sunny. I would say that we're going to be working in San Diego.
Right. And okay, so I have so many questions. So I'm going to before I jump into my questions about your book, I want to hear your kind of personal journey or any defining moment in your life over time in your career that has brought you to this place of like these things are super important and I'm out to do something about them.
The older I get, the more defining moments I have, but that makes sense because every year brings more opportunities.
Maybe the big one that kind of shifted, what you were doing to what you wanted to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, I knew in high school that I wanted to be a doctor, and in my mind, I was going to be a family doctor in a suburban town and helped in the families for 30 years. And I went through medical school, did my family medicine residency, and I ended up in a suburban practice. And then, around a year into it, I'm like, wow, this is hard. I'm running from room to room every 15 minutes, and it's kind of frustrating because I really only have enough time to write a prescription or order a test. And I know my patients aren't happy about it because they probably feel that I'm rushed. I'm like, this is kind of ridiculous. If I just had enough time, I could help them understand what's at the base or the root of their illness. And then I'm thinking one day, you know, they're running to work right after they leave me, or they're coming from work and they're at their jobs for 2,000 hours every year. A light bulb, hello, if they're only with me 15 minutes and they're at their workplace for 2,000 hours, where do you think there's a better chance to influence their health and well being? So, Kristi, that was my aha moment. I mean, I changed my career trajectory because of that.
Yeah. That is so logical and simple, yeah, I think, like, so overlooked, right? And, like, when you break it down to the time spent and the impact that you can have, when you think, like, in the world, like, doctors have these significant impacts, but maybe it's the leader that you've had for 10 years because you actually spend more time with them than you do your family medical doctor.
Yeah, I love my doctor. I don't want to dismiss doctors altogether. There's definitely, valuable. And when I speak with HR audiences or leadership, I often will include this story because I just want them to understand how much power, how much influence they have. And it's not just on the success of the business. It really, it's kind of scary in a lot of ways. And I shouldn't say only, we often hear about how detrimental the manager can be on the mental health of their team. Hey, let's flip it around. There's a lot of good managers out there who are not getting a lot of good press. And even the ones who are causing harm, they probably aren't aware of it, and nobody has helped them understand how to do this better. So let's just take a breath and give them a give them a break and just guide them in a better direction.
Yeah. I was talking to somebody about this actually earlier this morning, and I was saying that, far too often we recognize people in an organization that handle a fire drill really well, right? But yet, many times people are overlooked for preventing the fire from happening in the first
Yes,
place.
exactly. Exactly.
It's almost the same thing. And I was like, we should really consider the people who have worked really hard to prevent the fire drill because they're the real hero. I mean, they're both important because there will be fire drills, right? But there's recognition many times for like taking care of the problem versus yeah, managing before the problem happens. So okay, so then fast forward, you write a book, right? Like what inspired you to write the book? I have a lot of questions about the book and kind of your philosophy on certain things. So, talk me through that.
Sure. Well, you can imagine my career journey was not straight. So shifting from being a family doctor to leading the employee health and well-being strategy at Johns Hopkins Medicine was not a straight line, and it took many different jobs to get me here and a lot of education. So after we were getting situated at Johns Hopkins Medicine, pivoting because when the pandemic set in, we had to shift a lot of things, including our employee health and well-being strategy. I would say about 6 months into it, I said, I've been keeping a journal for about 10 years on the work I've been doing at Johns Hopkins Medicine with the intent of writing a book. Because I started keeping the journal, Kristi, about 3 months after I started working there because I had this feeling that we were going to do some good things. And I'm closer to the end of my career. And I'm like, it's kind of time to put this in a book because there's a lot of leaders and HR professionals who don't understand their role in supporting the health and well being of their team and their organization. And I'm not going to be working one day, hopefully. And so, yeah, that was the essence of writing the book.
That's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna go backwards for a minute. There was a long journey to get you to where you are today, right? In your current role. And when we first talked, you shared a little bit about that. And I just think it's so fascinating and interesting of how you got to where you're at. And I think it's important to share here so other people can hear about it because when it and you can summarize it, but when you say it's not linear, right? I think it was very fascinating how you shared with me your thought behind taking certain roles in order to get you to a larger purpose.
Right, right. So, first, I needed to get out of that family practice because I was kind of burnt out before burnout was a word. I mean, I didn't realize how much emotionally energy I would be putting into caring for my patients. I came home exhausted and discouraged because I didn't feel like I was making huge progress. So, I taught at George Washington University on faculty, School of Medicine, and that was a great step for me because I really like teaching. I like communicating and it gave me time to continue seeing patients, to teach, and also do some research. And it was during that time that I spoke to several medical leaders at large companies like ExxonMobil and asked for their advice. How could I get into that space? The three of them told me I need to go back and do a residency program. But that time, my wife and I, we had two mortgages on our house. We had car loans, we had student loans, we had a new baby. It wasn't happening. So my next step was to lead an occupational medicine office. I got very, I shouldn't say lucky because I had good credentials, but I led an occupational medicine office where I learned about the nuts and bolts of occupational medicine, like workplace injuries, pre-employment physicals, drug testing, all that stuff. And from there, I got a job at Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Maryland, leading the prevention and disease management strategy, which included more than 1 million self insured employees. So, the largest employers in our mid Atlantic region. That's when I started getting to work with employers directly. In my previous job, I was working with employers, but it was through their employees. So I gradually took on more responsibility. And I wasn't one of those insurance doctors who was looking at the charts trying to figure out if we should pay this or not. I was really in a very strategic setting, which was awesome. And then this job at Hopkins was posted, and it wasn't a job I wanted. You're like, what is he talking about?
Well, this is what I find so fascinating about your journey, right? Is like it's not linear and sometimes it's not always exactly what you want, but it's what you want to get you somewhere else.
Yes, well, it was exactly that. And I had to think outside the box because the job posting was for a medical director for their insurance plan. They have, or we have now, because I'm inside the walls. So Hopkins was one of our customers when I was at Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield. So I already kind of knew them a little bit. And during the interview process, I came to realize that, hey, they had a strategy for paying claims, but they didn't have someone inside Hopkins to do the overall health and well-being strategy. So, Kristi, I accepted the offer and I had to work uphill. I had to push the boulder uphill to get to where we are today. And actually, that reminds me of the episode that you had with Scott Shute, where he talked about how difficult it is to forge a new path forward. But if you're diligent and you can make the case and you're persistent, you can often succeed.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that too has to do with like authentically what's inside of you, right? So you can maybe force is the wrong term, but like push that boulder really hard. But if it's not what you really want, it's what you think you want or what somebody else is telling you should do. It's probably a lot harder and that might come out inauthentically. But what it sounds like here is like this is authentically who you're design, how you're designed and what you want to, how you want to impact this world. And so that likely showed up quite a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. The people I've worked with, including my managers over the years, have all had something in common with the feedback. Because I'm very passionate about what I do. And it's actually kind of surprising I didn't realize that this might be the direction. Because in medical school, I actually created a program, an educational program for elementary school students in Western New York, and with the sponsorship of the American Heart Association. I would bring four other medical students out to these different elementary schools, and we would put them through an interactive program to teach them about heart health during the school day. And it was the same idea. They're in school all day. Let's help them understand a little bit more why it's important to play at recess and how to either bring healthy food for lunch or pick the healthy food in the cafeteria. Same idea. But I didn't see the like, hey, Rich, wake up. You're about to like spend 30 years working. Maybe this is something you should think about.
Yeah. I mean, that's really living out, meeting people where they're at, right? So, like, you're getting them the information and meeting them where they're at. So it sits with them. They understand it. They can put it in the context of like what's important to them. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've been lucky, fortuitous. I've had a lot of good experiences in my career.
Yeah. So, okay, your book, A Cure for the Common Company, right? So, I know there's meaning and purpose behind the word common company that you use, and you use it throughout the book. So, can you help me understand what does that mean? How does that concept relate to organizations today? What was the purpose of you using that term?
Well, I'm laughing because first, I like the way it sounds. It's called alliteration, I believe. My cousin's a professional writer, and she helped me with the title, and I like the CCC sound. But there is meaning behind common company, and that is that every company has at least one employee. And if you have one employee or 20,000 employees, what you have in common is that you are much more likely to succeed when you have a healthy and well workforce. And there are some fundamental elements that everybody can embrace in order to get that health and well being and succeed.
So, you had this journal and you knew at some point you'd probably write a book. But like, was there anything that you're like, now's the time, or I must do this, or I'm doing it for this person?
Well, the timing was that, we weren't going many places, that first year of the pandemic. So I've learned many things over my career. Many things have succeeded, but some things have just not, I had to learn the hard way. And one of the things I learned along the way is that it doesn't matter how many health and well-being professionals you have, how big your team is. If you don't have the human resource professionals and every team leader on board and working with you, you're never going to optimize your health and well-being strategy. So, Kristi, I just felt compelled to write a book that was going to be helpful to the HR community, to the business leaders, to every manager and leader above, to make it easier for them to to support the people they lead.
And how did you rally the people to be in the current role that you're in today and to help the organization see that this is in fact important? Like, what was your strategy there?
Yeah, right. It wasn't an accident. I learned the business of health and well-being when I was at Care First Blue Cross and Blue Shield. A little bit at the previous occupational medicine company, but really how to speak with leaders about the costs of an unhealthy workforce. And I learned to speak and define value better. So I had a head start once I got to Johns Hopkins, but still, it was quite a bit of strategic thinking and intentional actions to ask this very large and reputable healthcare organization to not only continue delivering excellent care to our community and to the country and the world, but also to do better for our own employee population. So I was walking around campus about 3 months into my job thinking, okay, I know the nuts and bolts of this job, but how am I going to start moving the well being part, the prevention part?
Yeah, because there's that prevention again, right? Like, you can define curing something when it's a problem, right? But, like, preventing something is harder to define. So, I'm so curious what that looked like.
Right, because it's just too common that a company is waiting to pay the medical bill or waiting to have a vacancy because they can't recruit because they haven't made something attractive about their company that they hadn't put their finger on yet. So I was on this walk and I was just kind of deep thought, and I'm like, hold on a second, I think I just saw something. I turned around. I said, "Oh yeah, I did see something. There's a big red truck sitting there outside our building, outside of our main hospital campus." So I turned back on my direction and I take a few more steps. I'm like, hold on a second. I think there's something odd about this. And I turned back around and I just looked at him like, wow, that was the biggest soda truck I had ever seen. And not only was there a soda truck, but I was literally contemplating, Kristi, there's something else wrong with this picture. And then I saw an E, capital letter E above and on the side, just an E. And I'm like, what is this? The truck is clearly at a loading dock. Oh my gosh, this is the old emergency room. How ironic. And I'm thinking to myself, at the time, I was volunteering to help a county government in Maryland transform their approach and educate their communities about the perils of soda and sugary beverages. I'm like, we should be doing this as an organization. And that's where we got rolling.
Oh, wow. Okay, so what was the like, so then you had this kind of epiphany, if you will, right, as you're visually seeing this. So then what happens next? Like, you have to rally people around in that like, your idea too, right? Because you have all this experience and all these ideas and thoughts leading up to something, which I actually think sometimes can get in the way of HR leaders, right? Because 'Cause they've been sitting and thinking in all of these things for so long, and then they roll it out to a leader, and the leader's like, "Have you gone mad?" Like, "What the heck are you talking about?" And it's like, it makes so much sense to us, but then they haven't had all the time to kinda sit in it and process it. So, how did you go from idea to impact?
First, that's when I started my second job at Johns Hopkins because they were not paying me to do this. Kristi, there were several things happening simultaneously. For one, I was researching not only what other communities were doing this, but were there any other companies doing this? And there were definitely communities who are addressing this, but I wasn't finding companies who were taking this on at the time. There was actually, I have to give Mass General some credit because they were, and maybe there might have been one other hospital doing the same. And then I had to think about the impact of sugar on health and how could I demonstrate that. So I started looking at our healthcare claims and I identified, okay, this is how much we pay on to diabetes. That's a very clear connection. And by the way, sugar, and most people didn't realize this 10 or 15 years ago, is inflammatory, and inflammation increases our risk for heart disease and other bad things like cancers. But I was able to identify several parts of our claims, not only how much it costs, but how many of our employees were affected by it. Not to mention that this sugary beverages were inside our cafeterias and vending machines where our patients and their families were visiting. So I had the whole health equation down and I was starting to get the business equation down. I decided not to ask for permission from my boss or something like that because I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was really just putting ideas together and then I was putting people together. I found some people from marketing who were interested in working together, as well as some human resource professionals who were interested. And then I was laying out the plan based on organizational change. But that's another thing I learned over my 25 years. If you really want to make a difference with employee health and well-being, you got to treat it like any other organizational change effort. And I needed to figure out a model on which to base this beverage transformation to make it move forward.
So, did you have something that helped you recognize that you needed to treat it like any other organizational change? Was there something that you tried to do and you're like, oof, that didn't work very well?
Yeah. So when I was at the occupational medicine company, it was mostly individual patient focused. And I had a couple of projects with companies to improve safety and fitness. So we were getting somewhere. And then when I was at Care First Blue Cross Blue Shield, it was not individual at all. I was not a doctor like the traditional doctor in that capacity. I was like a physician executive. And so I was working with employers and how to do this as a strategy. Now I had to do both. I had to both look at this as an employer and a business, as well as look at employees as patients. And so, in order to move this behemoth of an organization,
Yeah, because how many employees are there?
40,000. So, I knew we were going to have to change some processes and how we thought about stuff because I've been studying this already. At that point, I was already in 15 years. And so it just knew it. It wasn't like I was scratching my head because things weren't working. This was a known issue to me.
Yeah. Did you have any great resistors?
Uh, yes, Christy, I definitely had a couple of great resistors. Most people were not great resistors. So if you look at the diffusion of innovation model for organizational change, if you want to look that up, you'll see that most people are in the middle. You're going to have some great innovators and advocates for change, and you're going to have some stragglers and some distractors or detractors. But most people are going to be in the middle. And yes, I'm not going to call them out by name, but I can picture their faces very fondly.
Yeah. So another thing that I know you write about in your book, and I think I often come across is this idea of prioritizing well-being without compromising productivity or the company's bottom line, right? Like I think so often we're talking about like, well, what's the ROI? Or, I don't have time for that because I have to be doing X, Y, and Z, and it becomes a productivity conversation. So, How did you work through I know you had a ton of research, and I love how you kind of take the medical lens of it and then apply it to the human being or the company, so that helps, but anything else that you did in particular was helpful in helping people understand the importance of this?
Sure. Well, we've done a lot since since I saw the soda truck, but I'm going to use that as the example because
I
I've,
think it's a great one.
I've already set us up, to the audience up to get them in my head. That's an example of, listen, we don't have to stop working to walk over to a vending machine and see 80% of choices to be healthy, and they're identified by a green leaf, and they cost less than the unhealthy beverages. That doesn't take any more time getting from your work area to the vending machine. And so, no interruption of productivity. And, as a leader, you don't have to sit there and talk to your team about how bad sugar is.
Yeah. Right, right, right. They're like, "Oh, geez, you sound like my parents when I was a kid."
Yeah. I don't want everyone to believe that's all of our strategies are like that. We do have some strategies that are individual focused, but we're very conscious that our workforce, hey, we see patients. We're not just stopping what we're doing for 4 hours. That's ridiculous. And we're very conscious that the largest amount of time that we could possibly get from an employee is a half hour. That's your lunch break. So nothing's longer than a half hour. And we do a lot of things where employees and managers can work well-being into their workday while they're absolutely working. I haven't had an issue with the productivity because I never asked for something that was unreasonable. Now, the ROI is another story, though. For some reason, somewhere in the last 3 decades, somehow people started to think it's okay to ask it, what's the ROI when it comes to health and well being? And, I've had different answers over the year. I've said, hey, if you have a chair that has 4 legs, but one of the legs is broken, so it keeps rocking, don't you think you'd buy a new chair without asking what the ROI is? So, why is it that the greatest asset that we have, our employees, our workforce, if they're not healthy and well, what do you think that does to patient care? What do you think that does to the likelihood that they're going to stay working for us? Kristi, I literally have used that example inside Hopkins and elsewhere, but I've also used it on computers and tables. You pick your object. And I've used it on departments. Like, why aren't we asking what is the ROI on finance or marketing? Why are you reserving that question to our work? And it usually doesn't upset people.
Probably stops people in their tracks like, "Oh, yeah, again," like, that's a really simple way to put it, but makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, but I don't stop there. So for example, let's talk about smoking. There's published literature to show how much more money it costs to employ someone who smokes than someone who doesn't. And the same can be true of a whole list of unhealthy habits. And so, if you have the right person in your company who knows how to access that type of research, they can make the case for it. I'm still not a big believer of ROI, even though we can find economic data, because that assumes that nothing else is going on in this person's life, right? So, Kristi, I haven't drank soda except for maybe 1 or 2 times in the last, 2 years for like decades. And yet, you know what? If I have a friend who dies, I'm not going to be feeling so great for a few months. And maybe that's nothing that my employer could have predicted or dealt with. But if I'm going to hold my employer accountable for their health and well-being strategy, I think that's really not fair.
Totally. I yes. You put that so simply, and I love it because it needs to be simple for people to understand.
Yes. No, listen, I think I was asked on another podcast, what's your superpower? Just pick one. I think it's that I have learned how to connect the health world with the average person and this idea that I can communicate. And it was actually kind of fun writing the book because I use stories and I believe, based on the feedback I've gotten from many readers, that it's very relatable.
Yeah, yeah. I think we just like have overcomplicated things, right? I mean, that's kind of what I'm out in the world trying to accomplish also. And by having guests like you is to help people understand that it doesn't have to be complicated and it doesn't have to be, death by analysis in order to just move the needle 1%. Cause that's simply with the big red truck, that's simply what you were doing, right? Is like 1% movement, whether it be just an idea or thought, it was still 1% movement in the direction that you wanted to take things, right? So it wasn't like, I'm going to boil the ocean. It was like, I'm just going to think a little bit differently and logically about what we're doing. And then I'm going to go do the next thing. And then we're going to see where it goes.
You know what's amazing is to think back to those early days at Hopkins and think about the vibe. The vibe did not include what are we doing to take care of ourselves? That was not the vibe at all.
And for a healthcare system, it's so interesting, right?
Well, that's not just Hopkins. I mean, I'm not throwing Hopkins under the bus. This is the way the healthcare community has, just was at the time. And I'll tell you, the vibe now is that it's a really important factor in our success, and our employees have embraced it, and our leaders have embraced it. And we keep seeing our well-being score go up on our annual engagement survey. So we have changed the culture.
Yeah. So one last question around that, because we've talked a little more about like, physical health, I would say. But this topic of mental health has been a big topic lately, right? I wouldn't say just lately, but I think coming out of the pandemic, it's risen to the top of things to take a look at or address or be aware of. So is there things from, an employee well-being perspective that you have seen work really well in this mental health space of employee well-being?
Yeah, I've seen several things. I'll give you one example, though. Probably in the summer of 2020, I got approval to hire a certified mindfulness instructor. She's been with us for 3.5 years. This is not your typical employee for any company. In fact, there's probably only about a dozen companies that have someone employed to deliver mindfulness and run the mindfulness strategy. And we have seen a growing uptake of our mindfulness services and our mindfulness strategy. And yes, we support individuals, but we also go out and work with teams. And I'll tell you, it's so well appreciated. I'm going to give Jen a shout out. She does a great job. Just this morning, she shared an email feedback from a program she delivered yesterday to one of our teams at our Care at Home site. These are people who go out into the community and help people in their houses. And just saying what an amazing job she did to help them see how easy it is in 60 seconds to be able to change your stress level and your outlook through the practice that she introduced to them yesterday. And if people only could learn some simple steps and then practice them, they could do it at any time of the day. And it makes a big difference if you keep doing that over time.
Yeah. Wow, that's really cool. And that to me shows it's almost like you can't put words on a wall to say what you're actually doing, but when you put somebody behind an initiative or invest in something that around those words that you put on a wall, then that's like practicing what you preach, right? And that's really cool. Mindfulness.
But I want everyone to understand that you don't have to have a certified mindfulness instructor to do some mindfulness work. Now, I am not a certified mindfulness instructor, but we did start a mindfulness strategy for probably about 3 years before Jen was hired. So if there were some things that I thought were safe and scalable that we could start doing to introduce the idea.
That is really cool. Awesome. Okay, so I feel like I could ask you questions and talk to you all day long, but I want to make sure that I honor your time also. If there's one piece of advice, coaching, tactic that people could go do as they walk away from listening this, that's simple and doesn't require a budget or approval or any of the silly things that sometimes we get caught up in, what would that thing be?
Yeah, this may sound a little bit odd, but I want to share something that every person can do. It's free, it's portable, and it's easy to learn. And that is, drumroll please, it's that you could learn how to breathe intentionally. Now, we breathe obviously to live, but too often we hold our breath when we're stressed, and we're stressed too much of our day. And so, if you can learn a breathing pattern that has been shown to lower stress, you're not only going to be less stressed, but your blood pressure is going to be lower, your muscles are going to be less tight, you're going to be nicer to be around, which is good for the people on your team. So, Kristi, this is not a breathing podcast.
Yeah, but I love this. This is like this idea of simple strategies that we already have at our fingertips. I love it.
Yes. And we do teach different breathing patterns at Hopkins. And this is what I was speaking to. We started teaching something called 478 breathing about 3 years prior to hiring a certified mindfulness instructor. And we won't get into it today, but it wasn't just a matter of, hey, get on a Zoom. We're going to teach you how to do this. We put different strategies in place within the workplace so that it didn't have to always come from the well-being team. It was coming from other areas.
Yeah, it's like integrated within the work area, and that's so important. I mean, I would stand behind this all day long is that like a well-being strategy and creating vibes in the workplace doesn't just sit with HR or employee health. It sits with every member of the team to some degree because they can play a part in it when they see somebody struggling or they see somebody holding their breath because they're stressed, right? Like there's everybody plays a part, whether you're a leader or not, in creating that energy or that vibe in the workplace for sure.
Yeah, yeah, and I weave mindfulness and breathing throughout the book. It's one of the themes. The book is not about stress, nutrition, movement like most wellness books are. The book is about pure support. How do you get people to work together to support each other's health and well-being? It's about norms. What are the acceptable behaviors? What are the unacceptable behaviors that people keep doing that's harmful to our health and well-being? But I do use examples that rely on nutrition, mindfulness, and the other things that we know are good for us.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to definitely link the book. If there's any information that I can link for that breathing also that people can try out, I think that would be great because those are the simple things that have so much meaning and impact, and they're overlooked far too often. So I really appreciate you mentioning that and talking about that. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, for sharing your wisdom and your journey. I'm so grateful for that and am looking forward to others experiencing what you have to offer.
Thank you, Kristi.
Wow, what a conversation with Dr. Safir. We discussed the concept of vibe in the workplace, emphasizing its definition as the collective emotional energy of a group. I love that. He talked through the impact of the social climate of the organizational vibe, sharing insights from his personal journey from medicine to leading employee health and well-being strategies. I mean, almost feels like it couldn't be more different, but yet so much alignment. He reflected on his nonlinear career path, the meaning behind the term common company in relation to the organizational health, and we also discussed the journey of transforming employee health and well-being initiatives within organizations. I love how he emphasized the importance of treating health initiatives as organizational change efforts, balancing well-being with productivity. You don't have to pick one. Both can be true. He also shared some innovative strategies for mental health support, including the hiring of a mindfulness instructor and the significance of simple, actionable steps for stress management, like drum roll, please. good breathing habits. So don't overcomplicate creating a vibe. Take a deep breath and get started. Keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.